president available?
Yep, one moment, sir. I'll connect your call. Sir, your call is connected. Hi, Bob.
Hey, how are you?
How are you? Congratulations on everything. We're proud of you. Congratulations. Great job. You went through a tough situation, and I don't think a very fair situation, but congratulations.
That was an interesting behind-the-curtain look at how the President of the United States receives calls when he's on board Air Force One, made more interesting by the fact that that wasn't Senator Bob Menendez on the phone. It was actually a prank call to what sounds an awful lot like the real Donald Trump, courtesy of the Stuttering John podcast. The host got through 2 call screens, even reportedly Jared Kushner. And as Axios points out, quote, this calls into question White House security. White House staff members are freaking out today trying to figure out how the podcast host was so easily transferred from the White House switchboard to Air Force One, per a source familiar with the call. NBC's Hallie Jackson joins us from the White House. Hallie, I know from my time in the White House that the protocol for a conversation between the President of the United States and a member of Congress is to go through the head of Leg Affairs. Any talk about a broken or non-existent process at this White House today?
Not formally, Nicole, no comment officially from the White House. But in this instance, normally that would not be interesting, right? A no comment from White House officials. In this instance, it is, because if that was not the president, or if this was not an issue, because that wasn't actually the president, you would be hearing about it. There would be pushback saying, well, this was fake. This is a edited or faux podcast or whatever. That is not the reaction that we have heard from West Wing officials today. So a couple of points to point out here. Number one, you are right, because you know this. There is a procedure and protocol that goes into place. Now, for this president, I will say he speaks with members of Congress all the time without going through the director of legislative affairs or through that office. He has a direct line to certain members of Congress. Bob Menendez probably not, right? Or at least that's not the indication, given that he was able to be connected through the switchboard. But it's not always the procedures and protocols are followed for those phone calls with this president because of his relationships on the Hill. That said, there are security questions that have already been raised about how a prankster got through, apparently to the president, on a phone line to Air Force One. Second piece of it is what else was in the call. So let's say this is Donald Trump. And again, the White House is not confirming that. They are not saying it's not. They're not saying anything about it. But if it is, later on in the conversation, this podcast guy, this former Howard Stern sidekick, asked the president about the Supreme Court pick, and the president talks about the timeline of it. He says, yeah, I want to name a Supreme Court pick sometime in the next 2 weeks, Nicole, with jives with what our reporting has been and syncs up with what I've heard from White House officials, which is the working assumption is the president is likely or would want to try to name a Supreme Court pick before he heads out to NATO on which starts on July 11th. So we are looking at the next 2 weeks here. And this is Stuttering John, who apparently is getting this information from the president, if it is the president, via this prank phone call. I would also note one other thing. Interesting start to the conversation, too. The president sort of congratulating him, and then right after that, talking about how it was it seemed to be an unfair investigation that Menendez was under. So lots to unpack in what was this, 5-minute crank call, apparently, to the president on Air Force One.
Rick, it is remarkable that forevermore, or at least until the president says something to another news outlet, we're going to have to credit the Stuttering John podcast for our most recent insight, as Hallie just reported, into the president's thinking on the timing for a Supreme Court rollout.
Well, Nicole, as a longtime Howard Stern listener,
I'm a Howard Stern listener
and fan. I can't
good on him.
I can't tell you how disappointed I am in Stuttering John. He asked the questions Chuck Todd would have asked him. Stuttering John was on Howard Stern.
What did you want to know?
Well, I'm not even going to go there.
Yeah, go there. Come on, you raised it. Where would you go? Where should Stuttering John?
Well, think about the things that Trump used to say on Howard Stern.
Hallie's covering her eyes.
Okay.
No, I can't.
Wait.
The text messages I'm getting now.
Serious question. This does epitomize the intersection of Donald Trump's loony world, which the Rev is nodding, knows all too well. Like, I bet if he just said who he was, hey, this is Stuttering John from Howard. I'm not sure that the president wouldn't have been just as eager to pick up the phone.
He might have got the call through. If he had said who he was, he might have got the call through anyway. I mean, the guy picks up the phone, the president of the United States, and congratulates the senator for getting out of trouble. That's his opening now.
Right.
And doesn't, what can I help you with? All of this that we would think a head of state would be concerned with someone from the opposing party. Hey, we're proud of you. and then goes on talking about the timeline for a Supreme Court justice. The reason, first of all, I've talked to Donald Trump on the phone. It does sound like Donald Trump.
Yes, it does.
Secondly, when you look at the fact that how would Stuttering John have called the White House? Why would he even call the White House and then get through the Air Force One and lie about it? It wasn't that he would call another number. He would know they would hang him by his shoes if he didn't call the White House. So why would he put himself in that kind of legal?
You have talked to Stuttering John before.
No, I've talked to unstuttering Donald Trump.
The Rev always knows all the players. All right, Hallie Jackson, thank you so much for bringing us this interesting story.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.